I don't, there's a couple of things I think people don't really understand when it comes to family court and family law. It's different each state. But in the state of Iowa, those records are sealed. No one's allowed to go through the whole court proceeding or anything for years.
Yeah.
And so, and I studied a lot of Russian history, and it seemed very similar to a kangaroo court. I don't know.
It is an unconstitutional administrative tribunal.
Yes.
Where they are without any real due process. They claim that they're not really, that they don't need to have the same level of due process because they're not punishing anyone, which means they're not putting anyone in jail and they're not fining anyone. They're stealing their children. There are many people, and I'm sure you are one of them. Put me in jail for a year, but let me keep my kids. They would much rather go, if they had to face going to jail or having their kids taken, they'd easily pick the jail if it meant they got to have their kids afterwards. But they claim, oh, that's not punishment. That's just us protecting the children. At no point does protecting children require removing due process. And the proof of that is that if you look at the stats, child abuse cases have gone way up since they moved away from treating child abuse like they do every other crime, where there has to be a criminal accusation and actual criminal court involvement and due process and all of that before you take anyone's child from them permanently. There's been way more child abuse. Now, they may say, oh, well, that's because there's a lot more false child abuse cases. Okay, well, that's still bad. Whether it's because there's more child abuse happening or because they're faking the numbers to be able to traffic more children and get federal money. Either way, it's not like there's less child abuse as a result of this. There's either the same amount or there's more.
But, first of all, the removal in the state of Iowa, they're funded an extra $2,000 a month. If they can prove their special needs, they'll get $4,000 a month. And so immediately after my son had been removed, they took him to it's not, but it's might as well be a state-sponsored psychiatry center. And what I mean by state-sponsored is Medicare and or Medicaid only accepts certain doctors in the state of Iowa.
Yep.
And so this was the only psychiatric franchise where it was accepted in the state of Iowa. And of course, they took him there, and immediately at age, he wasn't even 3, diagnosed him with ADHD and wanted to put him on meds. Now, I was shocked because I was like, there's no signs of it. But then I realized that if they did that, they would get an extra $4,000.
Exactly.
And I'm curious as to, as you monitor, you are the power, this has got to be new for you to see this many cases with the government interfering with parents.
If you had told me a year ago that this was happening, I would have been utterly shocked for about 30 seconds. And then I'd remember that we're talking about the government. I mean, frankly, it would not take me long to adjust to that reality because I know the evil that government as an organization can do. But I didn't know it was happening. And it still, I was taken aback. I was taken aback when I heard about it with Rodney and Tamisha. I was taken aback when I heard about it from the Matt and Tucky Hernandez. And then I was even more taken aback when parents started coming out of the woodwork. And I want people to realize something. When we go public with a cause, there are many more that we don't go public with, even though more than likely what they're telling is the truth, because we don't go public with these stories unless we have overwhelming evidence. Like there's no shred of a doubt that these parents did nothing wrong. And so we tell the parents that come to us, we need your medical records. We need the emails between you and the child. I mean, we have a team that's the bulk of the work that our team does is vet the causes that are brought to us. And the vetting for these causes is on a completely different level, because it's one thing if we put out a story of someone whose business is being taken from them with eminent domain, and it turns out that maybe we didn't know all the details or whatever. It's a completely different one thing if we tell the story of a family that's having their kids taken and it turns out they were actually abusing the kid. So when I say that we are careful, we err on the side of not going public with a family. If there is anything left to doubt, if there is even a shred of doubt or anything that could potentially mean that there might be more that we don't know, then we tell them, and we tell them that. We say, for the sake of what we're trying to do, we cannot even have one of these families turn out to actually be abusers. And so for everyone, we just went public with the Alexander family last week. We're about to go public with a family, the Collins family, this week. For every one of those, there's 10 to 20 more that we've seen that more than likely are legit, but it's not enough for us to go off of. So there's two things that we're doing with this. One, with these individual families, we are getting the public, and I'll talk about how that's helped the Hernandez family in a moment, but we're getting the public to go after those specific officials, contact them through email, phone, and so forth, and tell them there they are right there, and tell them to do the right thing. So that's the first phase of what we're doing. The second phase of what we're doing is we are talking with officials, legislators across the country, activists who've been working in this space for years and decades, and we are working on putting together model legislation to fix this at the state level, introduce it in one or a handful of states, and then push for that domino effect across the country. This can be fixed by reintroducing the concept of due process and the requirement for due process in these cases, the same way that they would for any other crime. And in some way, we're still working on the edges on how to do this, but in some way, disincentivize, remove the perverse financial incentive to just call everything abuse, and work that funding in such, whether it means refusing to take the money at all or filtering it through a program where people are paid to do their job, not just to call everything abuse. So whether they call it abuse or they don't, they're still getting paid the same thing. And once we do that, we'll be able to solve this problem at its root. And the third thing that we are doing, and this is something we do with every single one of our causes, we are driving home the point to people that this is what happens when you trust the government to protect you. Government is a uniquely bad way to organize people. And the expectation we have that human beings will respect us as human beings and that we'll respect them as human beings. And there are certain things we don't do to each other. We don't rob each other. We don't threaten each other. We don't commit offensive violence against each other. We don't assault each other and so forth. We put that expectation aside for the government, even though the government is literally just other people that if they weren't in the government, we'd still have that same expectation of them. And when we put aside that expectation that we be respected as individual human beings, these are the horrors that can result, and they are resulting. It's not an abstract concept. It is literally happening right now. And
in every state,
everywhere. This is happening everywhere. And so we are attacking it on all fronts. We're helping the people that are being harmed by it right now as best we can. We are working to make the changes, to push for the changes that will allow it to, or greatly remediate the risk of this happening in the first place and save countless tens, hundreds, maybe even millions of families in the future, tens or thousands, hundreds of thousands, however many families. And then we're also, again, as we do with everything, driving home the point that stop trusting the government. Stop telling the government, take more of my money, more of my power, more accountability from me, and protect me, because that's not what they do. They do this. This is what they do when you give them that. I can tell you how this has helped already with the Hernandez family. When their daughter Emma and Aria, when their daughters were taken from them, the judge refused to allow any of the evidence or the medical expert testimony that made it very clear that Emma Hernandez was not being abused and had a health condition. She would not allow it to be. She did everything she could. She actually tried to discredit one of the witnesses and claim that he had misappropriated his I forget what it was, misappropriated his vacation time, and that he had been fired. And he said, no, I took my vacation time early because I retired a year early, but none of that has anything to do with these facts. And she said, well, you resigned on odd terms, so I can't take you as a witness. She literally did everything she could not to take this testimony. She instead only allowed the testimony of the so-called child abuse pediatrician who showed up with no paperwork, David Hogg style, and said he showed
Because
up and said
he already knew Spike. He didn't have to. That's the
he knew
problem.
he didn't have to. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And he showed up and he said, well, yeah, statistically in these cases, this tends to be abuse. And when the parents' attorney said, okay, can you cite the source of that statistic? He said, well, yeah, you can look it up on the internet. That was what she allowed. After thousands of people contacted this judge, for some reason we will never know, miraculously, she's made a complete 180. And she allowed the testimony. She allowed the children to be taken out, Emma and Aria, to be taken out of foster families, and they are now living with family friends. And Matt and Tucky can visit them whenever they want to. They just can't go home with them. And she said, as soon as the criminal charges are dropped, I will be happy to drop everything on my side. I can't as long as but she's basically done everything she can as long as the criminal charges are in place. On the criminal side, we've been able to help them because when they were first charged with abuse, part of the bond conditions that they had to agree to be allowed to leave jail was that Matt and Tucky Hernandez were not allowed to speak with or be within a certain number of feet of each other indefinitely. And so for nearly a year, they have been legally estranged, where they can't talk to each other. They can't ask someone to tell someone the other thing or anything like that. They basically forced them to be essentially divorced for nearly a year. After many people contacted the judge in that case for no particular reason, in a complete and miraculous 180, the judge modified the bond conditions, and now after just over 10 months of being legally estranged by forcibly estranged, a couple weeks ago, Matt and Tucky Hernandez started living together as husband and wife. We still have a long way to go with that case, but that is what happens. That's what we're already able to do to help families by getting people on these public officials and making it politically expedient for them to do the right thing. We're doing all the other stuff as well so that we can fix this at its root. But in the meantime, we're helping families now.
Well, and I think that really speaks to part of this problem. And I love that you have this where you can just click on it, email Brian Kemp, the governor. Click on this. You can email the county district attorney. Click on this. You can email the commissioner of DHS. Those are all huge moves.
And on all of those, we have wording template, because what happens is people will want to email Brian Kemp and be like, let this family back, you piece of crap. Like, I mean, you're so angry after hearing about this, and you may only remember some of the things you saw, but you just know you're mad and you want to tell this guy something. We have the wording template there, and you can use all of it. You can borrow from it. You can modify it as you want. You can add some colorful language if you want. Whatever you want to do is fine, but all the facts are there. And so if you we make it as simple as can be. If you agree with us that this family needs to be reunited, here is wording that you can borrow from, and here is who you contact to try to get it done.
Well, and I don't know if you've ever read the Gulag Archipelago.
Yeah, long time ago.
Well, and this is exactly what's going on with families in the United States. Kids are being taken. They're being, families separated and then not being allowed to have any contact with each other. And you just don't know. You don't know what happened to your kid. You don't know what happened to your spouse. I mean, it's as authoritarian, and I was a huge Daily Show, Colbert Report type of I considered myself, central Democrat in my early 20s. And me personally going through this experience, I saw the sheriff of our town lie on stand. I saw all sorts of mistruths, and I went in there blind, thinking like, oh, it's going to help me.
The system will protect me. The system will protect me.
The system will protect me. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't protecting me. In fact, it was doing the exact opposite. And it got to a point where at the third year, my final hearing, fighting for my son, the DA came up to me and apologized and said, I'm sorry you got to go through all this. and then they took and then they took my son. And
I'm sorry we have to do this to you.
and that was my apology. And you know, in my case, you know, like, I like to insert myself into it. You know, I apologize for
Of
doing that.
course.
But it's, you know, I felt so helpless when it was going on. And the fact that you're doing this for families, because this is, like we talked about, it's not just a national problem with CPS. It's a national problem with the whole legislative system in
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
It's the judges involved, the DA
Yeah.
is involved,
Yeah.
your attorney's probably involved. And
The
you know,
doctor at the children's hospital is involved.
well,
Everyone is involved. Everyone all the way down the line, everyone that has to look at your kid or you is getting paid off to call it abuse. And if it turns out it's not abuse, they don't have to give the money back. But if they say it's not abuse, they don't get any money. So what happens is the people in those positions do one of two things. Or actually one of three things. They either do the right thing and get fired by their higher ups who just need to make sure that the amount of money coming in is
yep,
maximized. So that happens. They fired. They go, I can't do this, and they quit. Or they go, well, hey, look, hopefully someone further down the line will do their job, but I'm going to call it abuse. I'll err on the side of caution. Oh, I get some money too. Wow, that's great. Because that's the other thing. If you say it's not abuse and it turns out it is abuse, that falls on you.
yes, yeah.
But if you say it is abuse and it turns out not to be abuse, all right, well,
There's
great.
no
No,
there's no
I still got my money. It's just the level of perverse incentive is disgusting, and I can't even imagine. You know, you said you're centering yourself in this. How could you not? You lost your son. Like, it's disgusting, and I I hate that this happened to you, but I'm glad that you told me, because I focus a lot on these families that I'm working with and the possible future families that this could affect if we don't fix this. I, in this moment, need to remember there are families for decades that this has been happening to, especially in recent years with the recent changes that have happened at the state and federal level. And it's I want to make sure that the nightmare that happened to you doesn't ever happen again. And
well, and
that can happen.
I think it's beautiful that by you, you know, doing this and showing people that these aren't isolated incidences.
No,
You know,
no,
they are occurring daily, and
yeah,
it's an abuse. In the end, it's an abuse of power is what has happened, and it
yep,
shows why you can't ever. You know, when Lily talked about, you know, can you promise me that this government will never become tyrannical? You know, it already is
it
tyrannical.
already is.
It
Yep,
already is tyrannical. And it's starting, you know, it's so silent. You know, we can talk about race, we can talk about gun rights, we can talk about
yep,
Israel, Gaza, we can talk about Ukraine funding,
yep,
uh, but no one talks about what's going on in these small towns and counties. And you know, a lot of these cases are just because they don't live up to you know, to the they live in the poverty level where, you know, the person checking in on them has always and always will be a suburban wife, you know, and they expect the standard of living should be that of which they live.
yeah,
And anything below that is considered abuse. That is
yeah.
abuse.
Yeah,
And
uh, and what's crazy is, so like with the Hernandez family, they had a caseworker come to their, because they had already taken Emma, but Aria was still the older daughter was still living with them, and so a caseworker came and said, "This is a lovely home, and Aria is very well cared for, and I think reunification should be the goal." So they arrested both parents for abuse and took Aria from her.
well, and
How is that reunification?
you talk about CPS, you know, they outsource these home checks. I don't know, and it may not be the same for every state, but in our
Yeah,
state, they outsource it. So there's someone that went to a 2-year college, got told what parameters to look for, and then weekly visits and supervised visits, all that stuff is
yeah,
outsourced.
yeah,
And if that company is not living up to their standard, they fire them, and they
yeah.
find another company that will do what they want.
That will
It's
say that it's abuse in every case. Yeah,
it's scary. In my opinion, I think it's scary. It's been going on for at least 10 years. I mean, it's been going on longer, obviously,
yeah,
but I think
yeah.
ill intent and the dollar signs has really pushed it along in the last 10 years.
There has
Uh,
been a series of things, and we're still going down the rabbit hole. I mean, we have attorneys involved. We're building basically a task force, a nationwide task force of legislators, attorneys, experts, doctor, like just people across the board, investigators, and they're all working together to figure out just how deep this thing goes, because you have to know the monster you're dealing with before you know how to fix it. And so what we're seeing is, it's sometime around the 1970s, they started experimenting with treating child removal cases in family courts instead of in criminal courts. And the justification was, well, there are exigent circumstances in play sometimes where you got to get the kid, due process for, or take the kids first and due process later, sort of like red flag laws
red flag
for
law.
kids.
It's a red
Yeah.
flag.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, Trump would love this thing. And it's, but it was this kid could die this day, today, or this week, and we don't have time to spend weeks or months in court, and so we're just going to take the kid permanently, not in a temporary 48-hour hold to make sure everything's okay, permanently or indefinitely anyway. And so that was when they first started experimenting with it. And then I believe sometime in the 1990s was when they shifted the federal funding with Title IV, to start paying them to call it abuse. And then that's when you start seeing year after year, state after state started changing their guidelines, and they basically made it where it's like, yeah, if it makes any noise, assume that it's quacking like a duck and call it a duck. And if a kid comes in with anything that could potentially be considered an injury, call it abuse, even if there is medical evidence that it's as a result of a health condition, or that it's not abuse. There are also cases where there are accidents, kids playing around and falls, and there's witnesses that it was an accident. Call that abuse too. Call everything abuse. I had someone recently inbox me on Twitter, and full disclosure, I'm not a parent. And they said this person's a parent, and they said, they actually took a picture, and they said, my kid has this little bruise that she got, and we think it's a baby. We think it was how she was laying in the crib. It's just like a little, like, minor, bruise. She said, and they said, I'm scared to take her to the hospital. Should I be? And I said, look, I can't give you that advice. I would tell you, first, take your kid to a pediatrician if you trust that pediatrician. But I don't feel comfortable after the cases I've seen, and we still don't know how widespread this problem is, like what the odds are here. I don't feel comfortable telling you to take your kid or to not take your kid, because I don't feel comfortable telling people not to take their kids to the doctor. But
Yeah. Always. Yeah.
for a variety of reasons. But I'm not sure I feel 100% comfortable saying, oh yeah, you'll be fine. I said, I believe that the majority of times everything is fine, but I don't feel comfortable advising you on that. And I said, I will say, I've started telling parents, know who your attorney would be in this situation if something were to happen. That is one thing that I would say. Make sure that you have some kind of person that would be your attorney in this case, so that you don't get completely blindsided if, God forbid, it does happen. But I couldn't tell that person whether I thought it was a good idea or not. And because
That's horrible. It's horrible.
it is horrible.
Your kid, yeah, you got to be afraid to take care of your kid for fear that your child could be removed from you.
Yeah. And then you can get in trouble for not taking your kid to the hospital. So it's like, you take your kid to the hospital, it's taken from you, and they say it's abuse. You don't take your kid to the hospital because you're scared it's going to be called abuse, and looks like the kid's okay anyway, and then they take the kid too. It is a frightening thing to be a parent in this country, and it's getting worse and worse. And the reason people don't want to talk about it is because, what about the times when it is really abuse, and what if not all these cases are as apparent or as true as they seem to be. That's why we've been very careful. But this is arguably one of the most important things happening in this country, because this is far more likely to affect parents. The average American adult in this country is a parent. They're far more likely to be affected by this than they are with what was happening in Gaza, or what's happening in Ukraine, or frankly, what's happening with gun control, or what's happening with a variety of different things. The reality that the CPS in every single state. It's called different things, DFACS, DCFS,
Sure.
DYCF, different things in every state, but their child protective services are increasingly being weaponized against innocent parents because they get paid to do it. That is arguably, if not the most horrifying thing happening in this country, certainly one of the most horrifying things happening. And we're not going to rest until we fight it and end it at its core.